A few hours ago in China, something happened that nobody expected to see this early in the 2026 Formula One season. Red Bull collapsed. Not slightly. Completely. Max Verstappen finished 8th in sprint qualifying. His teammate Isaac Hadjar finished 10th. Both Red Bulls more than 1.7 seconds slower than pole position. For a team that dominated Formula One just a short time ago, that gap is shocking. But the real moment came seconds later. Because Verstappen pressed the radio button. And what he said instantly sent a warning across the paddock. The power disappeared. Again. 3 words. But in Formula One, those 3 words can expose a massive problem. Because when a driver like Verstappen complains about losing power on the straight, engineers know the issue is almost never small. And suddenly, the spotlight is on the brand new Ford-powered RB22. A project that was supposed to launch Red Bull into a new era of dominance. Instead, after only 2 race weekends, the car looks unstable, unpredictable, and surprisingly slow compared to its rivals. Meanwhile, Mercedes suddenly looks extremely strong. McLaren looks fast and consistent. And the reigning world champion, Lando Norris, might already have a huge opportunity if Red Bull cannot fix this car quickly. So the question everyone in Formula One is asking right now is simple. Did Verstappen just reveal that the RB22 is a serious problem for Red Bull? Because the data from China, the shocking performance gap, and that frustrated radio message may be the first real warning sign that something inside the RB22 project is not working the way Red Bull expected. And if that is true, the entire 2026 championship could already be changing. But the real story behind Red Bull's disaster in China did not begin in sprint qualifying. It actually started much earlier. Hours before the session. During the only practice session of the entire weekend. And that detail matters. Because sprint weekends give teams almost no time to understand their cars. 1 practice session. Just 60 minutes. Then straight into competitive sessions. If something is wrong with the setup, or with the car itself, you usually discover it too late. That is exactly what happened to Red Bull. When Max Verstappen first went out on track in Shanghai, the RB22 already looked uncomfortable. Not dramatically slow, but unstable. Through the long opening corners of the circuit, the rear of the car moved more than expected. The balance looked nervous. And every time Verstappen exited a slow corner, the acceleration did not look clean. At first, engineers assumed it was simply the normal process of learning a new car. Remember, the 2026 regulations changed almost everything. New power units. New hybrid systems. Completely different energy deployment. Teams are still learning how to manage these cars. But then the timing screen started revealing something more worrying. Mercedes jumped straight to the top of the session. McLaren looked extremely comfortable. And even Ferrari showed competitive pace in several sectors. Meanwhile, the RB22 remained stuck outside the front group. Verstappen pushed harder. New tires. More aggressive corner entries. Trying to extract performance from the car. For a moment he improved. Climbing up the timing screens. But as the session progressed, other teams improved again. And when the practice session ended, the result was uncomfortable. Max Verstappen finished 8th. His teammate Isaac Hadjar finished 13th. Both Red Bulls almost 2 seconds away from the fastest lap of the session. In modern Formula One, that gap is enormous. It means the problem is rarely just a small setup detail. Inside the Red Bull garage, engineers immediately started analyzing the telemetry. Battery deployment. Energy harvesting. Aerodynamic drag. Every parameter. And one pattern quickly became clear. The RB22 was losing time in every phase of the lap. Corner entry. Mid-corner stability. And most importantly, acceleration on corner exit. That last detail is critical at Shanghai. Because the circuit contains one of the longest straights in the entire championship. If the hybrid system runs out of deployable energy too early, the car suddenly loses speed halfway down the straight. Drivers call this clipping. The electric boost fades. Acceleration drops. And the lap time disappears. And that is exactly the behavior Red Bull engineers began to suspect. Because every time Verstappen exited the final hairpin and accelerated onto the massive Shanghai straight, the RB22 looked slower than expected. At first they thought it might be aerodynamic drag. But when they checked the energy deployment data, the numbers began to raise serious questions. Because the system appeared to be running out of electrical deployment earlier than planned. Which would explain the strange acceleration Verstappen was feeling. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because this exact problem had already appeared 1 race earlier. At the opening round of the season. In Australia. And what happened there may explain everything we just saw in China. But Australia revealed something Red Bull could not ignore. Because the opening race of the season already exposed the first serious weakness of the RB22. At the time, the focus was on the chaos of the race. Crashes, strategy calls, and Verstappen's impressive recovery through the field. But inside the Red Bull garage, the engineers were looking at something else entirely. Reliability. Because during that race, Isaac Hadjar's car suddenly failed. Not a small issue. Not a minor warning on the dashboard. A complete power unit failure. After only 11 laps, the Ford engine in his RB22 exploded. For a completely new engine project, that kind of failure immediately raises serious questions. Not just about reliability. About understanding the system itself. Because modern Formula One power units are not simple engines anymore. They are extremely complex hybrid machines. Electric motors. Energy recovery systems. Battery deployment maps. Thermal limits. Cooling systems. And all of those elements must work together perfectly. If even one element is slightly out of balance, the driver will feel it immediately. Sometimes as vibration. Sometimes as hesitation when accelerating. And sometimes as disappearing power. After Australia, Red Bull tried to calm the situation. Publicly, the team described the failure as an isolated incident. A rare technical problem. Something that would not become a pattern. But internally, engineers knew something important. The 2026 regulations changed the power unit philosophy more dramatically than any rule change in the last decade. Electric deployment now represents a much larger part of total performance. Energy harvesting under braking is far more aggressive. And managing the battery correctly has become one of the most delicate challenges in Formula One. If the deployment curve is even slightly wrong, the car can run out of electrical boost before the end of a straight. That is what drivers call clipping. The power fades. The car continues accelerating, but much more slowly. And the lap time disappears. Now think again about what Verstappen reported in China. The power disappeared. Exactly the same type of symptom engineers fear when the hybrid system is not perfectly calibrated. But there is another layer to this story. And it involves the biggest technical change inside Red Bull this year. The Ford partnership. For years, Red Bull dominated Formula One using Honda power units. That partnership delivered championships, race wins, and one of the most dominant eras in modern racing. But the 2026 regulations forced a complete reset. Honda stepped away from the main project. Ford entered as Red Bull's new technical partner. A brand new collaboration. New engineers. New hybrid architecture, new software. And projects like this rarely reach perfection immediately. Sometimes they need half a season to reach their real potential. Sometimes even longer. Meanwhile, other teams appear to have adapted faster. Mercedes looks extremely comfortable with the new hybrid systems. Their energy deployment appears smooth, predictable, stable across long straights. McLaren also looks incredibly competitive. Ferrari still searching for balance, but even they appear more consistent in straight-line speed than Red Bull right now. Which brings us back to the moment that shocked the paddock in Shanghai. When Verstappen exited the final hairpin during his sprint qualifying lap. He pressed the throttle. Expected the hybrid boost. Expected the surge of acceleration. But halfway down the straight, the power faded again. And at that exact moment, Verstappen understood something every Formula One driver hates to feel. The car was not just slow. It was unpredictable. And when a driver loses trust in the power delivery of the car, everything becomes harder. Braking points change. Corner exits become cautious. Confidence disappears. Which is why that radio message sounded so sharp. Because for Verstappen, this was no longer just a bad qualifying lap. It looked like the same problem appearing again. And if that pattern continues during the rest of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, Red Bull may be facing a much bigger problem than simply starting from the fourth row. And this is where the situation becomes even more alarming for Red Bull. Because a single bad qualifying result can happen to any team. Traffic. Tires. A small setup mistake. But what happened in Shanghai did not look like a simple mistake. It looked like a performance gap. When sprint qualifying reached its final moments, the numbers on the timing screen told a brutal story. George Russell secured pole position for the sprint. The Mercedes looked calm, balanced, and incredibly strong on the straights. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen could only manage 8th place. More than 1.7 seconds slower than the fastest lap. His teammate Isaac Hadjar finished 10th, more than 2 seconds behind. In modern Formula One, a gap like that is massive. It usually means something deeper is wrong with the car. But the way Red Bull reached that result made the situation even worse. Because the team barely survived the earlier qualifying segments. During the first session, both Red Bulls were already close to elimination. Drivers from midfield teams suddenly appeared in the same performance window. That forced Verstappen to push much earlier than planned. Then came the second session. And the tension inside the Red Bull garage increased again. Once more, the RB22 struggled to produce a clean lap. The rear of the car moved under traction. The balance looked nervous through the long corners. And the acceleration on the straights still looked inconsistent. When the timing screen updated, the result surprised even the engineers. Red Bull advanced to the final session. But only by less than a tenth of a second. Less than a tenth. For a team that once dominated qualifying sessions, that moment revealed something important. The RB22 simply does not have the pace yet. Inside the cockpit, Verstappen already understood the situation. This was no longer about fighting for pole position. This was about limiting the damage. When the final session began, the front runners immediately showed their strength. Mercedes looked extremely comfortable. George Russell delivered a clean, precise lap. The car looked stable in every corner. Meanwhile, the Red Bull still looked nervous. Through the long opening spiral of the lap, Verstappen had to correct the rear twice. Small corrections, but enough to lose valuable momentum. Then came the slow hairpin. One of the most important corners in Shanghai. Because the exit from that corner determines your entire run down the massive back straight. Verstappen accelerated. Full throttle. At first the car responded normally. Then halfway down the straight, the acceleration faded again. The hybrid boost disappeared earlier than expected. The car simply stopped gaining speed. And in that moment, Verstappen already knew the lap was gone. When he crossed the finish line, the numbers confirmed it. 8th place. 4th row. A shocking result for a team that once dominated Formula One weekends. But the most revealing moment came seconds later. Verstappen pressed the radio button. His voice calm, but clearly irritated. He told the team the power disappeared again. And that word again carries enormous meaning. Because it suggests the problem appeared multiple times during the session. Inside the Red Bull garage, engineers were already analyzing the telemetry. But hearing the driver confirm the same issue changes everything. Because drivers feel things that data sometimes hides. And Verstappen is known for giving extremely precise feedback. If he says the power disappears, the engineers listen. Right now, that feedback points toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. The RB22 may still be far from its real operating window. Which creates a serious problem for Red Bull. Because while they are still trying to understand the car, their rivals are already performing. Mercedes looks extremely strong. McLaren looks fast and consistent. And the reigning world champion, Lando Norris, suddenly has a car capable of fighting at the front every weekend. For the first time in years, Red Bull is not controlling the pace of Formula One. They are reacting. Trying to catch up. Trying to understand a brand new machine. And trying to solve a hybrid system that still behaves unpredictably. Which leads to the most important question after the sprint qualifying disaster in China. If the Ford-powered RB22 is already struggling this much after only 2 races, what happens when the real championship battle begins?